clear.
They're everywhere. That is okay. It's gonna be okay.
We'll make it, okay? We're gonna make it. Get rid of me! Hang in! Just me they want! It's just me! What the hell are you doing? Just hang on! Rover's been destroyed. There's no sign of Commander Walker.
American astronaut, Fred Haise, Apollo 18.
I'm gonna search for the Russian lander.
Get away from that. This is where they're coming from.
There's nothing here, okay? You gotta come with me.
You can't help me, but you can save yourself.
Nate, where are you? Oh no, no! How are you? Anybody hear me?
Come on!
I don't mean to rush you, partner, but we are running out of time. Tick-tock. You get that thing in orbit, we can rendezvous.
Open this door.
I can't let you in.
And I'm coming in.
No, 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 no!
Hey. Oh, Christ.
Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film Comics Explained, and as voted for by everyone in the latest poll, today we'll be exploring Apollo 18.
How could there be Russians on the moon and nobody knows about it?
We're on the moon. Nobody knows about us.
All right, we're almost at the point of no return, Ben. If we don't go now, we'll end up just as dead.
Come on, think about Watergate, Nate. I mean, that was our president, for Christ's sakes. And you don't think that DOD would just lie to us?
So what are we doing up here?
Neil Armstrong took a giant leap for mankind when taking his first step on the moon. During the Apollo program, 6 crewed missions would land on the moon collecting lunar material that was returned back to Earth, with the 7th, Apollo 13, notably requiring James Lovell, John Swigert, and Fred Haise to make a tense emergency return to Earth without making it to the moon. Throughout each of the successful missions, 12 astronauts performed a number of studies and observations that would shape our understanding of the moon. Each of the voyages were required to explore new areas of the surface and leave behind nuclear-powered instruments that continued to send information back to Earth long after they left. But the Apollo program would end in December of 1972 with Apollo 17. What happened? Well, the major impetus to head there in the first place was to beat the Soviet Union, which the US did. The instruments they left and material they brought back also gave them a detailed picture of what the moon was and how it related to Earth. Thus, it was deemed that the cost of another voyage was greater than the potential return on investment with regards to scientific data. It should also be noted that public support for the then expensive space programs declined in this period, especially during the Vietnam War, when a culmination of societal issues took the spotlight. While the Apollo-Soyuz in July of 1975, featuring the first US and Soviet Union international space mission, was a symbol of improved relations, and the late 90s and 2000s saw the construction of the International Space Station, it was deemed as though we would never be going back to the moon. The Canadian-American production, written by Brian Miller and directed by Gonzalo Lopez Gallego, follows the Apollo 18 mission. Through found footage recovered from the voyage, we learned that the supposed cancelled mission had actually made its way to the moon. Nestled between an explosion of alien movies released in 2011, including Super 8, Battle Los Angeles, The Darkest Hour, Cowboys and Aliens, I Am Number 4, Paul, and The Thing, the prequel we covered last week, Apollo 18 is a fascinating piece of revisionist history. Taking elements from films like The Blair Witch Project and Alien, the mayhem that followed is explained as being the real reason why the US abandoned any further attempts of heading back to the moon again. It's explained that on July 20th, 1969, Apollo 11 astronaut Neil Armstrong was the first man to walk on the moon. The following year, Apollo missions 18, 19, and 20 were cancelled due to budgetary concerns. On December 7th, 1972, Apollo 17 became the final official lunar mission that actually landed on the moon. However, in 2011, 84 hours of classified footage from NASA's Apollo 18 mission was uploaded to the website lunartruth.com that told another story. The film we see is basically an edited down version of everything that was recovered. In December of 1973, Lunar Module pilot Captain Benjamin Anderson, Commander Nathan Walker, and Command Module pilot Lieutenant Colonel John Gray are informed that their previously cancelled Apollo 18 mission had been greenlit. But there's a caveat. It was now a top-secret mission spearheaded by the Department of Defense. NASA had essentially been hijacked, with Nathan, Ben, and John being sent to place military instruments on the moon that would alert the US of incoming attacks from the USSR. Informed the classified payload featured high-frequency transmitters and radar scanners, the men were also given cameras to document their voyage.
This is Thomas Young at Apollo Mission Control. In addition to the Mauer 16mm cameras,
Looks like 5 reels, 10,000 feet Kodachrome.
While happy they were going to the moon to help their country, the guys are a bit upset that they had to lie to their families and not tell them that they were about to accomplish their dreams. Nathan comes from a long line of military pilots in the family and has embraced the fact that duty can sometimes outbalance a private life. With a distinguished career and years of experience, he's leading the voyage and moon landing. John is very cognizant of the geopolitical tensions underlying the journey and is responsible for taking them to the moon and bringing them back. And while the extremely intelligent Ben is honoured to be serving his country and joining Nate on the surface of the moon, as a father wanting to make his son proud, he's understandably upset that he won't be able to tell his boy he was going to the moon. Fueled by secrecy and the rockets of the Saturn V heavy-lift vehicle developed during the Apollo program, the Freedom Command Module launches into space with the Liberty Lunar Module and 3 brave astronauts on board. Making the 240,000-mile journey in 4 days at average speeds of 3,333 miles per hour. After orbiting the moon, John anxiously watches as Nate and Ben take the Liberty module to the surface.
Wish you were coming with us, John.
now you boys be careful down there.
You too, buddy.
Gearing up on December 25, 4 days, 9 hours and 23 minutes in, the pair get ready to commence day 1 of their 2-day mission. Guiding them at the Apollo mission control is Capcom, or Capsule Communications Operator Thomas Young. Notably, the module has data acquisition cameras to record all facets of the mission, meaning NASA can see inside the ship at all times. Observing the sun was low on the horizon and that there were rock formations everywhere, they revel in excitement like kids in a playground, placing the American flag down before jumping with joy. As they begin setting up the exterior cameras and sensors, Ben then places a photo of his family on the surface, essentially his way of sharing the journey with them. Interestingly, when they bring out the classified PSD-5 equipment payload from the DoD, they get a massive power flux on the sensors, which momentarily scrambles their power and communications. With Nate asking Houston to get a fix on the location of the interference, the pair then use the rover to head to the first marked location and begin setup procedures for the payload.
Hard to believe the sun never shines in some of these places. Ever.
Careful now, fellas. You drop into any of those craters, you'll get cold in a hurry.
Noting that they were getting some noise on the high gain again, they collect geological samples near a huge impact crater and observe that they felt strange. And they're right. The rocks aren't what they think they are, but something extraordinary. The only hint of which is slight movement, picked up by the cameras, which the astronauts unfortunately don't notice in time. Their first day is ultimately deemed a success. The guys go over their samples, enjoy dinner, and go to bed as multiple cameras and sensors begin transmissions to Earth. With no hiccups except for the continued static interference and Ben accidentally hitting his head as he climbed into bed, the spirits of all 3 men are quite high.
Ryan, what are you doing? Just playing, Mom. Don't play with your dad's stuff. Babe, is that recording? Sorry, Dad. Love you.
But as they sleep, they're awoken to strange signals and sounds that resemble screeches. While Houston chalked it up to interference from the payloads, the 2 guys note that it sounded like the signal was coming from their location. Regardless, after being told Houston would touch base with DoD for more information, the guys go back to sleep, as one of the cameras pick up what appears to be a small rock moving in the distance. Hilariously trying to document evidence that Nathan snored in his sleep, Ben gets the camera out the next day and catches his friend in the act, before being startled by Nate, who revealed he was awake the whole time. With John's Freedom module rotating over the dark side of the moon, he informs them that he'll be out of reach for a few hours, as the guys prepare for their final day on the moon. Interestingly, as Ben has breakfast, he finds one of the samples he collected yesterday, now on the ground. Having bagged and tagged everything methodically, the pair are perplexed. Scooping it up, they decide to label it as contaminated, before discussing how this could have happened.
I don't understand. How'd I get there?
I don't know.
No, really, Ben, how'd I get there?
I don't know.
Running a diagnostic on the first payload, they try to contact Houston, but their communication is blocked, leading them to speculate it was due to the craters. Completing the diagnostic, they activate the signal on the PSD-5, but Liberty is unable to reach the Earth. Saying that there was something wrong with the frequency, and how communications shouldn't be cutting out for this length of time, Ben starts looking around the area and finds human tracks.
What?
No, it's impossible. These aren't ours.
Unable to reach Houston or John on the Freedom module, they decide to follow the tracks and reach a location where the temperature had dropped. Strangely, the tracks make no sense, heading in all directions without meaning or order, making them speculate that the person might have been disoriented, likely a result of oxygen deprivation. Much to their surprise, as they go over the ridge, they locate a Soviet LK lander and determine the Russians had arrived there some time ago.
How could there be Russians on the moon and nobody knows about it?
We're on the moon. Nobody knows about us.
But when they enter the lander, they find the functional module trashed and covered in blood, as if someone had gone crazy inside. With oxygen reserves in the interior good and the power working, they speculate where the Russians were and why they would abandon their craft. Despite their suits not being primed for the cold within the craters, Ben heads into the dark with only the flash of his camera to illuminate the area. Pointing out the ground felt different, he's then horrified to find a dead cosmonaut, leaving them with more questions than answers, in addition to a growing distrust of the DoD. While Ben was in too much of a panic to notice, the rocks in the background also appeared to be moving around him, and there's a terrifying reason for this. After dragging the body and the damaged helmet out of the crater to show Nate, the pair speculate that another Russian cosmonaut might have killed him, before returning to notify Houston, who aren't being very helpful.
We land less than 2 clicks in the Soviet LK. You expect me to believe you didn't know they were here?
You know they scrubbed their manned flight program in '69.
Wanting the truth, Nate demands that Mission Control get the DoD to contact him ASAP, almost refusing to cooperate unless they do. Things get weirder the next morning, with a signal scrambling their exterior camera, and Nate waking up to the cosmonaut's helmet falling on top of him. Not only that, but when Ben looks out of their window, they find that their flag was now gone. Reaching out to John, they ask whether it could have been another cosmonaut that did it, but he rightfully points out that it was a 12-hour walk from the Russian LK to their module. Without a rover, the person would have run out of oxygen. He then posits that there might not have been another cosmonaut at all, given that the Russians often flew one-man missions. Finally getting back to the guys, the Deputy Secretary of Defense informs them that they suspected the Soviets might have been there, but had no confirmation. But when pressed why they didn't bother telling them, he simply explains it was a matter of national security.
We were concerned they might get their eye in the sky up there first. It would be a national security disaster.
Admitting their intelligence suggested there was only one cosmonaut, he tells them to get ready and focus on coming home. The only problem is they're forced to abort when the Liberty module suffers catastrophic damage to the exterior seconds before liftoff. Not only this, but strange tracks outside suggest signs of extraterrestrial life. This is confirmed when Nathan jumps outside to make repairs and finds all the equipment knocked over before feeling something inside of his suit, causing him to freak out. While we see that it's a spider-like crustacean, when Ben recovers him unconscious, Nate begins to deny that anything even happened. It's not until they lose communications again, and a wound in Nathan's chest reveals a piece of moon rock had embedded itself inside, that they start to realize the trouble they were in.
Let's get it. God damn, you contaminated the entire ship!
The lunar arachnids are essentially the only form of life found on the inhospitable surface of the moon. In a resting state, they appear indistinguishable from simple lunar rocks, but carry a powerful venom which induces severe psychotic symptoms in humans, and eventually death.
Previous wound seems to have become infected. Eyes appear extremely bloodshot.
When resting, the carapaces of the arachnids close around their bodies to disguise them as rocks, but when mobile or hunting, they utilize spider-like appendages and 2 large pincers to catch and incapacitate potential prey. The creatures come in a variety of shapes and sizes, from rocks small enough to fit in one's hand to boulders large enough to be mistaken for large stony outcroppings. This camouflage mechanism is curious, as it implies that the creatures either needed it to hunt or to hide from larger lunar predators. And though we don't see any of the other creatures, there could be a hidden ecosystem thriving in the shadows, with other creatures that chose not to reveal themselves to the Apollo 18 crew. Based on the effects and symptoms following a bite, and with respect to the creature's foreign biology, their venom appears to harbor both neurotoxins and hemotoxins that simultaneously killed the host while driving them into psychosis. The foreign toxin induces a number of horrific symptoms, including blackening of the veins around the bite area, bloodshot eyes, necrosis of the flesh around the bite, severe antisocial behavior, and violent psychosis followed by death. In the light, these creatures remain dormant, seemingly alluding to a partial reliance on solar radiation for sustenance, in a process similar to photosynthesis. Dormancy during the day could also help prevent damage from exposure to intense ultraviolet light, as the moon has no electromagnetic sphere to prevent the harmful rays from bombarding the surface. Though the creatures are occasionally seen moving in the daylight, it appears as though this only happens when they're forced to do so. Typically, they will not move or twitch even when being handled and relocated by unsuspecting lifeforms. For example, a few were taken as samples and didn't shed their disguise until significantly later when the sun had gone down. When the sun did vanish, they became chillingly active, and it's believed the freezing temperatures motivated the creatures to seek warmer spots and hunt for prey. The Arachnids also seem to communicate with each other through the use of radio waves, with their communication often picked up by the equipment, which often disrupted connections with Earth and the Freedom module in orbit. Our own radio chatter might be painful or annoying to the creatures, explaining why they were so hostile to the sensors planted throughout. Like the creature that made its way inside Nathan, the smaller, perhaps juvenile members of the species have been shown to burrow through flesh like parasites. The body of the Russian cosmonaut was also severely emaciated, suggesting the creatures fed upon the man's vital fluids and blood. I think it's likely the mothers of the species carry their newborn young within their carapaces to keep them warm, and so the creatures could have simply mistaken the warm bodies for the shelter of a female of their species. One thing is for sure though, they're smart, silent, deadly, and work in unison, hiding in plain sight until wanting to attack, which is why they were so difficult to deal with. As Nate and Ben speculate the payload was actually designed to monitor the aliens instead of the Soviets, Walker's infection continues to worsen, making him paranoid about the intentions of both NASA and his own crew.
They're blocking our comm. They're emitting a signal.
Why would they be doing that?
To attract the things that made the tracks that you saw.
As it turns out, they were right. The pair are essentially guinea pigs, and now that one of them had been infected, DoD has no plan of bringing them home. As the sickness worsens, in a fit of rage, Nathan tries destroying the interior cameras and accidentally wrecks the Liberty module controls, causing the ship to lose pressure and power. Determining the Soviet LK was their only source of power and oxygen, and having noted the lander was similar to their module, they decide to take the rover over to the LK. But with Nate admitting that he was getting worse and needed to be left behind, he crashes the rover and heads to the edge of the crater where they found the cosmonaut, explaining he was being drawn to the creatures. Waking up from the wreck, Ben follows him to the crater and sees him being pulled in by the Arachnids. And despite giving chase, he decides to flee to the Soviet lander, reasoning it was his only chance of getting back. However, he's about to receive the worst news ever. Despite Ben managing to make radio contact with USSR Mission Control and getting them to connect him to the DoD, he's ultimately informed by the deputy that he will not be permitted to return to Earth. Completely aware of the situation and admitting that they were sent there as an experiment, fearing that Ben was infected like Nathan, they inform him that nobody would assist him. What they don't anticipate is John refusing to accept the order and leave them. And so, after getting into contact with Ben in the Soviet LK, he guides him on launching the lander and rendezvousing with him in orbit.
I don't mean to rush you, partner, but we are running out of time. Tick-tock. You get that thing in orbit, we can rendezvous.
While Nathan comes back enraged and begins attacking the lander, right before he's able to breach the glass, dozens of arachnids begin swarming him, eating Nate alive from the inside. Left without a choice, Ben launches into orbit, hoping to spacewalk over to the Freedom module. At the same time, John is informed he must abort the rescue or face a communication blackout that will prevent him from safely returning home. Worse still, the moment the Soviet craft enters space, the zero gravity causes many of the samples collected by the Russian cosmonaut to float around Ben, which then begin to attack and infect him. With Ben having lost control of the Soviet LK, which continues to head towards the Freedom module without reducing its speed, the footage suddenly ends, implying a collision had sadly killed both John and Ben. Scrambling through footage of the astronauts at a barbecue before the launch, we're told the official report stated that they all died in different missions around the world. As the epilogue kicks in, we're told that over 800 pounds of lunar rock samples had been brought back during the Apollo missions, hundreds of which were given to dignitaries of foreign countries, alluding to the notion that they would eventually multiply and spread across the globe. Having said that, it's important to note that Apollo 18 has 4 alternative endings that were scrapped, each as miserable as the last. The first had Ben in the LK after being attacked by Walker. Surrounded by the arachnids as the LK lost oxygen, he slowly died as an alien left the shot pleased with its work. In the second ending, Anderson is talking with DoD in the LK and sees the veins of his arms turning black, revealing he was infected the entire time. As the toxin took over his mind and body, as it had done with Nate, he begins to smash a control panel in a rage, before breaking the camera and presumably suffocating to death. Ben is also in the LK for the third ending, but this time, a large arachnid breaks the window of the LK and kills Anderson with a pincer. In the fourth and final ending, an infected Anderson manages to launch the LK as the creatures tried to break in, but with the alarms beginning to sound, he looks out the window to see the lander lose power and begin plummeting back to the moon. With that said, that's all for today, folks. A huge thanks to everyone that voted me cover Apollo 18. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and if there's anything else you'd like for me to cover, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.